Hey guys, it's Libby. It's the end of October. Oh my god. So let's talk about the books that I read. This month I read 4 novels, 2 plays, 1 collection of short stories, and I also DNF'd 2 books, which is pretty unusual for me. I think I've only done that once so far this year. So the first book that I read was Soulless by Gail Carriger, I think. And I did a whole review of that book, so I will give a link to that in the doobs. It'll also be at the end of the video, because it was a recent video, and I put those at the end if you want to click and watch more of Libby. Then I started the audiobook for A Great and Terrible Beauty by Libba Bray, which is the first book in the Gemma Doyle trilogy. I got a couple of chapters in, and I did not like it. It's set in the Victorian era, and it starts in India and then relatively quickly moves to a school outside of London. And the headmistress of the school was just so absurdly, like, evil in that sort of persnickety Victorian way. And she was a caricature. She was a caricature. I didn't want to read that. And there was like weird magic that I didn't really like, and this is definitely a chosen one narrative. And also the parts in India, there are Indian characters, and the audiobook narrator did them with a very strong Indian accent. And I decided that this was not racist. But if you have to think as hard as I did about whether or not something is racist, I feel like that's a bad sign in and of itself. So I put down Great and Terrible Beauty. Let me know if it like really gets better after the first couple of chapters, or if other Libba Bray stuff is good, because I'm just not feeling it right now. Then I read The Winter's Tale by William Shakespeare. I thought I was going to be going on a whole Shakespeare binge, as I sometimes do, where I read like 3 or 4 plays in one weekend. I ended up only reading this one because of the next book I was reading. So this is one of Shakespeare's later plays. It's either classified as a comedy or a romance, and it is about a man who is the king of Sicily, which I've been to, shout out to Sicily, who thinks that his wife is having an affair with the king of Bohemia. Have not been to Bohemia. And so he does all sorts of horrible things to her and to his daughter, who he thinks is the daughter of the king of Bohemia. But he's wrong the whole time, and then he sort of gets he gets 16 years of comeuppance, and then it sorts itself out well in the end. All's well that ends well, as they say. So I gave that one a 4 out of 5 stars. It's a lower 4 out of 5 because there is some distinct silliness that goes on. But you know, I'll give it the 4 from the Bard. Then there were 2 books that I had either already started reading or got right about the time that the Shakespeare binge hit me, which is why it was just a single Shakespeare play instead of a whole Shakespeare binge. The first one was Lemony Snicket's Why Is This Night Different from All Other Nights, which is the last book, the 4th and last book in the All the Wrong Questions series, which is the spin-off from a series of unfortunate events. And I needed to know what happened. I needed to know who Hangfire was. I needed to know if Theodora was going to nobly redeem herself. I needed to know a bunch of things. As with other Snicket series finales, I got the answer to some of those things, but mainly I just got more questions. I thought that this would answer the questions from a series of unfortunate events. It did not. It just gave me more. You know what this means now, Snicket. It means you have to write another spin-off series. I will not be content. Also, in case you don't know, Lemony Snicket is the pen name for Daniel Handler, but he writes it in the first person. So this series is about the young Lemony Snicket, who later narrates the series of unfortunate events. But Lemony Snicket's not a real person. It's all being written by Daniel Handler. I gave this 5 out of 5, even though it made me mad. And the other book that got me off of Shakespeare was Killing Adonis by J.M. Donnellan. I got this as an ebook because I think you can only get the physical copy in Australia. What sort of nonsense is this? But so I really enjoyed it. It's, on the one hand, it's a contemporary, and this is arguably the first contemporary I've read all year, depending on how you want to count The Seas by Samantha Hunt. But this one is definitely, has no magical elements aside from irony and coincidence. It takes place in Australia, and we start with a young woman named Freya who has a nursing degree, and she's been working as a nurse. And her greatest dream was to become a nurse in East Timor, which is an impoverished nation south of Indonesia, to administer vaccines to all of the needy people there. But at the beginning, she is instead getting fabulously drunk and deciding to delay this trip to East Timor because of what happened to Valerie. What happened to Valerie? You will have to read it to find out. So one of her drinking buddies shows her this advertisement for a job for a nurse. The information comes on a very brief note card. The front says, "Wanted nurse, a proper girl one, not a silly male one, pretty but not too pretty, clever but not too clever." And then the back says, "Applicants with an excessively curious and inquisitive nature are distinctly not welcome. Light duties, large pay, all cash, no questions asked or answered." And Freya, since she's very drunk, makes the incredibly brilliant decision to send her application into for this job, and she gets it. And she ends up in the world of the uber rich, the 1% of the 1%, the people who may in fact run all of our lives and governments. It was very interesting, had a very satisfying end, and a couple of moments where you're just like, whoa, like I had to stop reading because the realization I just couldn't handle it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And then the next book that I read, this was all happening during the 24-hour readathon, just so you know. I finished Killing Adonis and then read the next 4 books during the readathon. So the next one was The Fire Rose by Mercedes Lackey. I put this one down. I got about 50 or so pages into it. If you want all of my thoughts, I expressed them vehemently in my Dewey's Readathon wrap-up video, which will also be linked definitely below and possibly also at the end. It was just no. And that book has already returned from whence it came, i.e. my parents' house. And then during the readathon, I also read We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. You probably know Shirley Jackson because she wrote The Lottery, which is one of those short stories that they definitely make you read in high school. And in my readathon TBR, I expressed some apprehension about this being a horror story. I'm just gonna let you know it's not a horror story. There is a scene of mob violence, which, like, if you were there, it could be scary, but if you're not there and you're just reading about it happened to other people, it was fine. And this is one of those books where the situation is very slowly revealed, so I can't really give you a plot synopsis. It's about this young lady named, there she is, Mary Catherine, who lives, I believe in the South. I believe this is a Southern Gothic novel, just like based on the food that they eat, and that it gets hot enough in the summer to like soften the concrete. But she lives in a big house on the edge of town with her sister Constance and her uncle Julian, who has some problems, and her whole family is disliked by the rest of the people in the town. And we slowly figure out what this all entails. I quite liked it. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And then I read Kissing the Witch by Emma Donoghue. This is a collection of short stories which are reworked fairy tales, and they are very female focused. Emma Donoghue, I think, is considered to be a feminist writer to the extent that that phrase has value. And they're all very short, so they do really come across with that fairy tale vibe. Like, oftentimes characters don't have names, they're just the girl, the princess, the man, whatever. And it's very much focused on the characters' interaction rather than the setting. Since this is about like women and women's issues, a fair number of these stories are lesbian fairy tale retellings, either because the traditionally male half of the romantic couple is a woman in this version, or because our heroine chooses to be with a different character who is a lady. I liked it. I thought it was very interesting, but I do definitely like the traditional way of telling fairy tales with that sort of voice that I mentioned earlier. And I do have to say that I think the best retelling is the first one, which is a retelling of Cinderella. I'm not totally sure if that's because it is actually more meritorious, or if it's just because I didn't really get what was going on, and that introduced me to it. I think it was also the one that diverged the most from the original fairy tale. It's a Cinderella story with no stepmother or stepsisters. And Donahue never really tells you directly what story is being retold, but you can generally figure it out. A couple of them I wasn't able to figure out what the original story was. So if you know what the Tale of the Bird or the Tale of the Brother or the Tale of the Kiss was based on, please let me know so I can read the original. I think that the Tale of the Kiss the last one might have been original. I don't know, it's either original or the main character, who is a witch, was not the main character and she was a side character in the original. That's definitely the impression that I got. So I would recommend these. It's short. Each one of these is like definitely less than 20 pages, sometimes less than 10. So you should definitely read it. And then just a couple of days ago, I finished Coriolanus by Shakespeare. The Shakespeare binge has perhaps been extended. Coriolanus is a Roman play, sometimes classified as a tragedy if you're using the umbrella genres as opposed to the tighter genres. It is about Coriolanus. He starts out as Marcius Caius Marcius. I got this. Who is an excellent fighter and wins Rome great glory. This is set in the Republican period, so there's no emperor, and it's, before Julius Caesar and all of that stuff. So this is more of a Roman legend than Roman history. There probably was a dude named Coriolanus, but there's probably a bunch of stories that have been made up about him. And so since Coriolanus becomes so famous for his military feats, folks want to make him the consul, which is kind of like the prime minister of Rome. There's always two of them, so he'd be one of the consuls. But in order to do this, he has to sort of be likable to the populace, because Rome really was interested in being a republic, being governed by the people. Coriolanus unfortunately hates the common people. They are dumb, they are smelly, he wants nothing to do with them, and so he's just kind of an epic jerk to them. And they end up rejecting him and throwing him out of the city. He then returns to to Corioli, which is the city that he captured or defeated, and earned the name Coriolanus, which means victor over Corioli. And I'm gonna go with the phrase "shacks up" with his old enemy Aufidius. And so then other things happen. I don't know, if it's spoilers, if it's Shakespeare, can I tell you the end? I'm not going to tell you the end, because this is relatively famous, but not one of the most famous of Shakespeare's. If it was like Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet, I would spoil the ending for you. But I will leave Coriolanus unmarred in your minds. So I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. It's pretty good. Shakespeare knew what he was doing. So those are my October reads. Currently, I am listening to the audiobook of The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte, which I got for free from LibriVox. Links below if you would also like to get it for free. I am definitely liking it. I was really liking it. It's told in 3 parts. The first part is narrated by Gilbert Markham, the middle part is narrated by Helen, and then the last part is again narrated by Gilbert Markham. And the Helen narrated stuff, like, it's about domestic abuse, so it's kind of tough to read and like not fun, but the Gilbert sections were amazing and I love them. And I don't think Tenant of Wildfell Hall is my favorite Bronte novel. Jane Eyre still wins, but I think Gilbert Markham may be my favorite Bronte narrator. He's a nice guy, he's not a jerk, he is hardworking and inclined to think the best of people, and that is really nice to read about, and I can't wait for Helen to be done so we can get back to him. I'm in chapter 45 right now, I think, or sorry, 35. So I have about 10 more chapters of all of Helen's horribleness before we get back to him. And I am also reading Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. I am on page 176, so if you've read it, she's just been told about the stag. The other books that I'm going to read in, what month is it? November. I'm going to be reading Cinder because apparently Marissa Meyer is going to be at Y'all Fest. Has this always been a thing or was that new? Did I just miss it? Anyway, I have to read one of her books. So this is Cinder. In case you didn't know, it's the first book of the Lunar Chronicles, the 4th book of the Lunar Chronicles, or I guess maybe it's the 5th book now, how are we counting Fairest, has come out recently, so so I need to read this and get her to sign it, unless I totally hate it. I don't like going up and having authors sign books that I didn't like. So these are both parts of series, they're first books in series, so I may end up just finishing these series this month. Actually, no, that's a lot of books. I don't think I'd be able to finish the entire series this month. But then also, look who we have here! It's Lords and Ladies by Terry Pratchett. I read no Terry Pratchett this month. Oops. And this poor book has been staring at me. This also has one of the greatest realizations in all of the Discworld novels. There is a romantic involvement that happened in the past that you would not have suspected, but is just amazing. And so you have to read Lords and Ladies. And then also I got a Scribd account, so I will have a free audiobook waiting for me every month, and all the free ebooks I want. Well, not free, it's a subscription service. So I might dip into those, and those are my plans. Also, I'm doing NaNoWriMo?